right? They don't seek a reason to be a sacrifice, but who sacrifice themselves for the earth, that the earth may someday become the overman's. Now, some people say that Nietzsche was not an altruist, and that's bullshit. You can see it right here. He loves sacrifice. He doesn't think you should sacrifice to God. He thinks you should sacrifice to some sort of mystical thing. Something, whatever. Some poetically mystical romantic thing. But if he had rejected altruism, he would reject sacrifice altogether, wouldn't he? No, he's an altruist. I love him who lives to know, and wants to know, and that the overman may live someday, and thus he wants to go under. I love him who works and invents to build a house for the overman, to prepare earth, animal, and plant for him, for thus he wants to go under, the man who works for this. I love him who loves his virtue, for virtue is the will to go under, and an arrow of longing. Pause for just a minute there. He was attacking virtue a minute ago, saying, whatever, he had syphilis, he was dying. I love him who does not hold back one drop of spirit for himself, but wants to be entirely the spirit of his virtue, and thus he strides over the bridge as spirit. Probably it was pretty thick sentence there. I love him who does not hold back one drop of spirit for himself, whatever spirit is. Let's hold that as a floating abstraction for a second. Something very important. You don't hold it back for yourself, but wants to be entirely the spirit of his virtue. You want your spirit all to go to your virtue, different from holding it for yourself. And thus that takes you over the bridge. Like I said, he's insane. I love him who makes his virtue his addiction and his catastrophe. Now, what we know from Ayn Rand is that your virtue doesn't lead to catastrophe, and if it does, it's the fault of the world around you in a certain way. I mean, and it shouldn't. It really can't. Virtue will lead you to certainty and happiness, even if you die on your feet, as Patrick Henry said he would. Dying on your feet will lead to more happiness, and you couldn't say it's a tragedy that you weren't able to survive and live as a slave. Anyways, your virtue is not something that can lead to catastrophe if you get addicted to it. Getting addicted to virtue will probably make you a billionaire. One virtue is more virtue than two. Echoes of the mathematics of 1984, huh? One virtue is more virtuous than two, is more virtue than two. You have two virtues, it'll cut you down in your total amount of virtue, because it is more of a noose on which his catastrophe may hang. Virtues lead to catastrophe. Oh, what a confused philosopher. Aren't the lines inspiring? Isn't it great poetry? I love him whose soul squanders itself, who wants no thanks and returns none, for he always gives away and does not want to preserve himself. Now let's write just right now, put away the idea that selfishness was an idea that came from Nietzsche and went to Ayn Rand. You're not supposed to be selfish, you're supposed to sacrifice yourself to the overman. And the overman presents himself, and you do what you can for him when he does. It's called a dictator. This is Platonic. This is right out of the Republic. This is the philosopher king is coming. It's our job to make him come. Do what you can to help it along. The idea that Nietzsche was up on selfishness is bizarre. He was up on self-sacrifice to a different goal. He didn't want self-sacrifice to the meek and the meager. He wanted self-sacrifice to the grand. You know, whoever said, quit sacrificing people and just be happy? There's Aristotle and Ayn Rand. Not too many others, huh? Not too many major ones. I love him whose soul squanders itself, who wants no thanks and returns none, for he always gives away and does not want to preserve himself. I love him who is abashed when the dice fall to make his fortune, and he asks, am I then a crooked gambler? For he wants to perish. So if you do win the lottery, you should be ashamed of it. Be ashamed of being a gambler. Because the guy wants to die. Like I said, Nietzsche's dying of syphilis. He's insane. I love him who casts golden words before his deeds, and always does even more than he promises, for he wants to go under. So not only say, I'm going to do this, that, and the other, but then surpass it. Now, there is a phrase that I loved from the fast food industry. The fast food industry, the restaurant industry, is full of inspiring philosophy. There's no other way America could run this great nation unless all of our companies were just like little philosophy houses, and they are. For example, there's this phrase from a fast food restaurant I worked in: under promise, over deliver. Promise 50 bushels and bring him 75. Never promise 100 and bring 50. Never do that. Always under promise, over deliver. Here's another one: leave 5 minutes early. You never know what kind of opportunity you'll run into along the way. And I decided that meant leave 5 minutes early. You might have a flat. You'll need that 5 minutes. Always arrive early to appointments. These are from fast food industry philosophy crap. Anyways, back to Nietzsche, shall we? The man who does more than he promises wants to go under. I love him who justifies future and redeems the past generations, for he wants to perish of the present. That is probably a line that I think would be very good for hermeneutical purposes, to read in the original German. I love him who chastens his God, because he loves his God, for he must perish of the wrath of his God. Fine, poetic. I love him whose soul is deep, even in being wounded. Even when you're wounded, your soul is deep. When you're wounded, you don't turn into a crybaby. When you're wounded, you wax philosophical as well. And who can perish of a small experience. It was said of Ayn Rand that sometimes a small comment or something would set her into a rage, and people would be like, that wasn't too big of a deal. And well, she was fulfilling this line from Zarathustra, wasn't she? Who can perish of a small experience. Thus he goes gladly over the bridge. I love him whose soul is over full, so that he forgets himself, and all things are in him, thus all things spell his going under. That verges on Eastern mysticism. That's crazy. I love him who has a free spirit and a free heart. Thus his head is only the entrails of his heart. Just the leftover stuff. But his heart drives him to go under. Ah, the emphasis on the mind is a little bit neglected there, isn't it? I love all those who are as heavy drops, falling one by one out of the dark cloud that hangs over men. They herald the advent of lightning, and as heralds they perish. Behold, I am a herald of the lightning, and a heavy drop from the cloud, but this lightning is called Overman. When Zarathustra had spoken these words, he beheld the people again and was silent. There they stand, he said to his heart. There they laugh. They do not understand me. I am not the mouth for these ears. Must one smash their ears before they learn to listen with their eyes? Must one clatter like kettle drums and preachers of repentance? They didn't like religion. Or do they believe only the stammerer? They have something of which they are proud. What do they call that which makes them proud? Education, they call it. It distinguishes them from the goat herds. This is why they do not like to hear the words contempt applied to them. Let me then address their pride. Let me speak to them of what is most contemptible. But that is the last man. The most contemptible thing is the last man right before the overman comes. And thus spoke Zarathustra to the people. The time has come for man to set himself a goal. The time has come for man to plant the seed of his highest hope. His soil is still rich enough, but one day this soil will be poor and domesticated. Unnatural, domesticated.